I am Daniel Pierce. I am 70 years old. 2 years ago, I was the founder and CEO of Pierce Properties with a net worth of over $50 million. Today, I was using a bent piece of wire to pick the lock on a restaurant dumpster, just trying to find something to eat. That's when a stranger in a $3,000 suit approached me. He said two things that shattered the frozen, miserable reality of my life. First, that my estranged brother Edward was dead. Second, that I had just inherited his $39 million estate, but only if I agreed to a single bizarre condition. Before I tell you what that condition was and how it launched a war against the very people I once called family, please let me know where you are listening to this story from in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you believe it's never too late to fight for what is rightfully yours. The November wind in Austin cut straight through the thin coat I'd found in a donation bin. My knuckles were raw, the skin split open not just from the cold, but from fumbling with the cheap padlock on the dumpster behind an upscale Italian restaurant. The smell of sour wine, spoiled pasta, and rotting cheese hit me, and my stomach growled. Just 2 years ago, I wasn't behind this restaurant. I was inside it, sitting at the corner booth, the one they always reserved for me. I was signing a check, paying for a lavish dinner for my wife, my son, and my daughter. A car door slammed, and I flinched, dropping the wire. I tried to make myself small to disappear into the shadows of the alley. But the car hadn't parked on the street. It had pulled right up to the curb. A Bentley. My Bentley. Or at least it was mine. The driver's door opened and Catherine stepped out. My wife of 42 years, the woman who had divorced me at 68, leaving me with nothing. She looked magnificent. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a dark green cashmere coat, the one I'd bought her for our last anniversary. She was laughing at something the man getting out of the passenger side had said. It was Ryan, my son, my 40-year-old heir, now the CEO of my company. He looked sleek and confident in a tailored suit. Then Catherine saw me. She stopped laughing. Her perfectly painted smile didn't falter, but it hardened into something sharp and cruel. She didn't register pity or shock or even sadness. She registered disgust. She nudged my son. "Look, Ryan," she said, her voice clear and cutting in the cold night air. "Your father." I froze, caught in the glare of the restaurant's security light, feeling like a trapped animal. Ryan turned his head. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of something. Shame, no. It was just annoyance. He looked away, pulling his phone from his pocket, pretending to check an urgent message. Catherine let out a low, amused laugh. She looked right at me, a 70-year-old man in filthy clothes trying to steal her garbage. "I told you, Daniel," she said, though she was speaking to Ryan. "No one will ever love a poor, failed old man like him. He's exactly where he belongs." She turned and without a second glance walked into the warm, bright light of the restaurant. Ryan, after a moment's hesitation, put his phone away and followed his mother inside. The door closed, cutting off the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. I just stood there, shaking. The cold was unbearable, but the shame was worse. It was a physical weight crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. Her words echoed in my head. He's exactly where he belongs. I was about to turn and shuffle away to find a bridge to sleep under when another car pulled up. This one was different. A simple gray sedan. A man in a conservative dark suit stepped out. He wasn't looking at the restaurant. He was looking directly at me. He walked toward me with purpose. I tensed, expecting to be told to move along, expecting a security guard or a police officer. "Excuse me," the man said. His voice was polite, professional. "Are you Mr. Daniel Pierce?" The name felt strange. No one had called me Mr. in a very long time. I just nodded, unable to speak. The man extended a gloved hand. I looked at my own filthy, cracked hands and hid them in my pockets. He didn't seem offended. He simply retracted his hand and pulled out a business card. My name is Mr. Wallace. I am an attorney with the firm of Wallace, Crane and Litton in New York City. New York? I was confused. I don't have any money, I stammered. I am not here for your money, Mr. Pierce, Wallace said, his expression unreadable. I am here on behalf of a client. Your brother, Edward Pierce. Edward. The name hit me like a punch. My older brother. The ruthless, brilliant, cold-hearted man who had built a hedge fund empire. We hadn't spoken in 30 years. Not since our father's funeral when we'd had a bitter argument about the family business. He'd left Texas and never looked back. Edward, I whispered. I am afraid I have difficult news, Wallace said. Mr. Edward Pierce passed away 3 days ago from a sudden heart attack. I felt a strange, hollow sensation. Not grief, exactly. 30 years was a long time. It was the loss of a possibility, the death of a reconciliation that would now never happen. I'm sorry to hear that, I managed. He was a very private man, Wallace continued, but he was very specific in his final instructions. His entire estate has been left to you. The alley seemed to spin. I must have misheard him. What? Your brother's estate, Mr. Pierce, his penthouse in Manhattan, his yacht, and his liquid assets, which after all taxes total approximately $39 million. $39 million. The number was absurd. It was meaningless. I looked down at my shoes, which had holes in the toes. But, Wallace said, and I knew there was a but. There is one condition. I looked up. The wind whistled through the alley, carrying the smell of garbage. What condition? Mr. Edward was very precise, Wallace said. He was aware of your current circumstances. He has stipulated that you will only inherit the $39 million if you agree to one non-negotiable term. Which is, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I'll explain everything, Mr. Wallace said, gesturing to his car. But first, Mr. Pierce, let's get you somewhere warm. Wallace didn't explain in the car. He drove me to a Marriott, a clean, anonymous business hotel. He walked me to the front desk, put down his credit card, and got me a room. He handed me the key card. I have a bag for you in the car with some necessities. Take a shower. Get cleaned up, he said, not unkindly. I will be back in exactly 1 hour. We'll talk then. I nodded, took the key, and walked into the hotel lobby. The clerk looked at me with open disgust, but said nothing. I rode the elevator up my own smell, filling the small space. I entered the room. It was warm. The carpet was clean. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower, turning the handle all the way to hot. The water felt like needles stinging my skin, which hadn't been properly clean in months. I scrubbed myself raw, watching the dirt and grime circle the drain. After I stood in front of the mirror, wrapped in a thick white towel, a man stared back at me, but it wasn't me. It was a ghost. A hollow-eyed, gaunt old man with matted gray hair and a look of permanent defeat. My cheeks were sunken. My eyes were dead. How did I get here? It wasn't a sudden fall. It was a meticulous, calculated erosion, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, all delivered by the people I loved most. Catherine had always handled the family finances. You're the big picture, Daniel, she would say, smiling, her hand on my arm. You build the empire. I'll handle the details. I thought it was teamwork. I thought it was a partnership. I was a fool. I gave her full access, full control. I was too busy building to notice she was building a fortress around my own money. And Ryan. I had made him a partner at Pierce Properties. I was so proud. I gave him operational control, wanting to ease into retirement. I thought it was trust. It was abdication. He was my son, my heir. I never imagined he would see me as an obstacle. The end came swiftly, just over 2 years ago. Catherine and Ryan called a family meeting. They seemed concerned, worried. They said they had spoken to my doctor, Dr. Mercer, my golf buddy. It wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. The next thing I knew, I was in a courtroom. I thought it was a mistake. Catherine and Ryan had filed a petition for an emergency conservatorship. They said I was a danger to myself and my assets. Dr. Mercer took the stand. Mercer, who I'd played golf with for a decade. He spoke in calm, clinical terms. Cognitive decline, he said, looking at the judge. Erratic decision-making. Signs of early-onset dementia. Erratic decision-making. I was confused. Then their lawyer brought it up. Mr. Pierce, the lawyer asked Mercer, would you consider a man wanting to donate $5 million to his university out of the blue to be an example of this erratic behavior? My blood ran cold. I had wanted to do that. I had mentioned it to Catherine and Ryan over dinner. I wanted to build a new engineering wing at my alma mater, anonymously. Mercer nodded gravely. In the context of other memory lapses and confusion, yes. It's a classic sign of impaired judgment. Catherine testified, crying about how I'd become forgetful and angry. Ryan sat there nodding grimly, the picture of a burdened son forced to make a terrible choice to protect his father. But the knife that truly killed me, that was Laura, my daughter, my little girl. She took the stand, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me, her eyes full of, "Was it pity, Daddy?" she whispered into the microphone. He forgot my son's name last week. Leo. He's my son. He looked right at him and called him Max, and he got lost driving home from the grocery store. The store he's been going to for 30 years. I had to go find him. He was just sitting in the car on the side of the road crying. Lies. All of it. Vicious, calculated, soul-destroying lies. My grandson's name was Leo. I had never called him Max. I had never gotten lost. I tried to object. That's not true, Laura. Why are you saying this? My outburst only proved their point. The judge looked at me with pity. Mr. Pierce, please, let your attorney speak. But my attorney, paid for by Catherine from my accounts, was useless. He barely cross-examined them. The judge, seeing a concerned wife, a burdened son, and a heartbroken daughter, granted their petition. Catherine was made my conservator. My assets, my company, my homes, my life, they were no longer mine. They were hers to protect. 1 month later, she filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences. With full legal control of all my assets, the divorce was a formality. She gave me nothing. She argued that as an incompetent person, I didn't need a settlement. I was evicted from my own home. I was given a modest monthly allowance for a small apartment. That allowance was cut off 3 months later. The checks just stopped. My calls went to voicemail. When I went to the office, my security guards wouldn't let me in the building. I was in the eyes of the law an incompetent old man. In reality, I was homeless, invisible, and erased. There was a knock on the hotel room door. It was exactly 1 hour later. I opened it. Mr. Wallace was standing there holding a thick briefcase. I was wearing the plain gray sweatpants and black t-shirt that had been in the bag he left. My old life, my old clothes were in a pile in the bathroom waiting to be burned. "Please," I said, gesturing him in. My voice was hoarse. He entered and sat in the chair by the desk. He placed the briefcase on the table and snapped it open. "Coffee?" he asked, pointing to the machine. I just shook my head. "Mr. Pierce," he began, "I am going to be very direct. My apologies for what you have been through. Your brother, he knew. He knew. Mr. Edward had a private investigation firm following you for the last 6 months. He was thorough." I processed this. Edward. The brother I thought had forgotten me. He had been watching. Why? He didn't say. He was a very private man, but his actions speak for themselves. He knew about the conservatorship. He has files on Dr. Mercer, including his gambling debts. He knew about the shell companies Ryan and Catherine were setting up even before they moved the assets. A cold, electric shock went through me. He knew all that, yes, which brings us to the condition. Wallace looked at me, his eyes sharp. As I said, Edward's will is unique. He left you everything. The 39 million, the penthouse, the yacht. On one condition. What is it? I said, leaning forward. That you use the resources of his trust, my team, my investigators, our lawyers, to legally overturn the conservatorship and recover every single dollar that Catherine and Ryan stole from you. I sat back stunned. The air left my lungs. He wants me to fight them. Why? Why not just give me the money? With 39 million, I could just disappear. Start over. Wallace's voice was firm, but not unkind. Because Mr. Pierce Edward didn't want to give $39 million to a man who had given up. He told me himself on our last call. He said, "I'm not giving my fortune to a ghost." Wallace leaned forward. He wanted to give it to the brother he remembered. The man who came to Texas with nothing and built an empire from scratch. He wanted you to get your dignity back first. He wanted you to win. The room was silent. I looked at my hands. They were clean now, but still scarred and trembling. There is a timeline, Wallace continued. You have 60 days. 60 days from today to formally initiate legal proceedings against Catherine Pierce, Ryan Pierce, and any other co-conspirators. And if I refuse, I whispered, or if I fail. If you refuse or if you fail to file within the 60-day window, the will is voided. The entire $39 million estate is to be transferred immediately to an animal shelter in upstate New York. I looked at him. An animal shelter. Edward always did have a dark sense of humor. I thought about the cold alley. I thought about the lock on the dumpster. I thought about Shin looking away. And I thought about Catherine's laugh. No one will ever love a poor, failed old man like him. A new feeling was rising in my chest, pushing past the shame, past the despair. It was something I hadn't felt in 2 years. It was cold, it was clear, and it was pure. It was rage. This wasn't about $39 million. I would have done it for $1. This was about the truth. It was about Laura's lie. It was about Mercer's betrayal. It was about my name. I looked at Mr. Wallace. My hands were no longer trembling from weakness. They were trembling with purpose. I'll do it, I said. My voice was no longer the whisper of a ghost. It was low, steady, and hard as steel. I'll do it. I'll take them down. All of them. Mr. Wallace nodded once as if he had known the answer all along. Very good, Mr. Pierce. We have a great deal of work to do. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single old-fashioned metal key. He slid it across the table. Welcome back, Wallace said. Edward also left you this. It's to a storage unit here in Austin. He said to tell you, it's your ammunition. Wallace drove me to a nondescript office park in a suburb south of Austin. The kind of place I must have built a dozen of over my career, all gray concrete and tinted glass. We didn't go into the main building. He led me around back to a row of single-story metal storage units, the kind you rent by the month. Unit 27B. He handed me the key, the one he'd given me at the hotel. This is yours, he said. Everything inside was paid for by the trust. It's at your disposal. I will wait in the car. I slid the cold metal key into the lock. It wasn't a cheap padlock. It was a heavy-duty deadbolt. I turned it, felt the tumblers click, and a heavy thud as the lock disengaged. I braced myself and pulled the heavy roll-up metal door. It glided up smoothly, silently. The air that hit me wasn't the expected wave of dust, mildew, and decay. It was the smell of new carpet, fresh paint, and electricity. I stepped inside. This was not a storage unit. It was a war room. It was a fully functioning, climate-controlled office. Against the far wall was a massive whiteboard, completely clean. In the center sat a large, expensive mahogany desk with a high-backed leather chair. On the desk was a brand-new high-end laptop, still closed. Next to it was a laser printer, a scanner, and a stack of neatly organized tabbed binders. File boxes were stacked neatly against one wall. The lights overhead were bright, clean fluorescents. The place smelled of fresh paper, new plastic, and printer ink. I stood there for a full minute, just breathing it in. It was the smell of my old life. It was the smell of multi-million-dollar deals, of late nights spent poring over blueprints of contracts being signed. It was the smell of power, of purpose, of control. It was the smell of the man I used to be. The man Catherine and Ryan thought was dead and buried, a confused old man, good for nothing but the garbage. I felt a jolt, like an electric current restarting a stopped heart. My hands, which had been trembling from cold and weakness for 2 years, were suddenly steady. The fog that had clouded my mind, a fog of shame and despair, began to burn away. I walked over to the desk. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool wood. I sat down in the leather chair. It supported my back, solid and firm. I was no longer a ghost in the alley. I was no longer a victim. I was a man in his office. I opened the laptop. The screen lit up, asking for no password. The desktop was clean, except for one folder. I put my hand on the mouse and it felt as familiar as my own skin. The skills of a man who had built a 40-year empire from nothing. They weren't gone. They were just sleeping. And they were at last awake. I opened the first binder. The tab was neatly labeled in a sterile font, RC Holdings. A jolt went through me. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the structure. It was a limited liability company, a shell corporation. I knew this playbook because I had invented this playbook for legitimate tax purposes decades ago. My fingers, no longer numb from cold, flipped open the cover. The first page was the Delaware Incorporation document. My eyes scanned for the date. 3 months before the conservatorship hearing. They had been planning this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. This was a premeditated assassination of my financial life. I turned the page. Bank statements. Hundreds of them. My eyes, which Catherine insisted were growing dull and confused, scanned the columns with a speed and clarity that came from 40 years of practice. I was a man who could read a balance sheet like a musician reads a score. And this was a symphony of theft. I saw it instantly. The flow of money was laughably simple, almost arrogant. They had made no real effort to hide it, because they were convinced their star witness, Dr. Mercer, had made me legally invisible. They believed the man who could trace these lines was already dead. They were wrong. Under their conservatorship power, Ryan had forced my company, Pierce Properties, to liquidate certain assets to cover debts. I saw the transaction, a sale of 3 prime downtown lots. Lots I had spent a decade acquiring, waiting for the perfect moment to develop. The buyer, RC Holdings. The price, a joke, a pittance, barely 1/3 of their market value. I flipped to the bank statements for RC Holdings, and there it was. 3 days later, a massive wire transfer into the account. A name I recognized, a New York development conglomerate I had been in talks with for years. My own son and wife had sold my land to themselves for pennies, then turned around and sold it to the real buyer for the full market price. I grabbed a legal pad from the desk. My hand was steady as I wrote down the numbers. Sale price from Pierce to RC. I saw $6 million. Sale price from Furry RC to New York, $24 million. $18 million. Stolen. Laundered through a company registered to a P.O. box. $18 million they had pocketed, all while I was being legally declared too demented to manage my own affairs. I felt a cold, calm fury settle over me. This wasn't just a family dispute. This wasn't just theft. They had used interstate bank transfers. They had used email. This was a federal crime. This was wire fraud. And they had just handed me the receipt. If the financial records were a calculated assassination, the next binder was a personal execution. It was labeled simply personal. Inside there weren't many documents, just a few papers, and a single small black USB flash drive taped to the inside cover. My heart hammered against my ribs. I plugged it into the laptop. There was only one file on it, an audio file. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely double-click the mouse. A voice filled the silent office. My son's voice. Ryan's. Smooth, confident, and utterly casual, as if he were ordering lunch. "Just say he's confused," Ryan was saying. "Just say he's getting erratic. The board is already worried about his donation ideas. All you have to do is make it official." Then another voice, lower, hesitant. "Dr. Mercer." "Ryan, I'm his doctor, not a psychiatrist. This is a big step. It's his competence we're talking about." "Dr. Mercer." Ryan cut in, and his voice lost its casual tone, replaced by something cold and sharp. "That new Porsche 911 Turbo S, the one you were admiring at the club last week, dark blue cream interior. It's waiting for you. Consider it a consultation fee, a very generous one." A long, heavy silence followed. I could hear Mercer breathing on the recording. A sigh. I will review his charts," Mercer said finally, his voice thick. "I do believe I recall some minor cognitive lapses. Yes, I'll schedule a full evaluation. I'm sure I'll find what you need." The audio file ended. I just sat there, frozen. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin icy. A car. A sports car. He had sold my life, my freedom, my identity, for a goddamn sports car. The $18 million was business. That was theft. This was patricide. And then beneath the flash drive, I saw the last piece of paper in the binder. It was a printout of a deleted email. An email from my daughter Laura to her mother Catherine, sent 2 weeks before the hearing. "Mom," it read, "I know this is wrong. I know Dad isn't really sick, but I really need that $100,000. The credit card debt. My husband will kill me if he finds out. I'll do what you said. I'll testify. I'll talk about the birthday. I'll say he forgot Leo's name." The last bit of air left my lungs. The last shred of weakness, the last flicker of hope that she was just a pawn, that she was a victim. It vanished. She hadn't been coerced. She had been bought. My own daughter. For $100,000. The grief was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was a cold, pure, surgical rage. The last drop of any love I had for them had just evaporated. They weren't my family. They were just the enemy. I picked up the new sterile phone that sat on the desk. I dialed the number Wallace had given me. He answered on the first ring. "Wallace," he said. My voice was a low growl. I didn't even recognize it as my own. "I've seen enough," I said. "I've reviewed the ammunition. I need a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. Not an estate lawyer." I paused, looking at the name RC Holdings on the whiteboard, the ink gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "I need a shark. I need the best, most ruthless corporate fraud and litigation attorney in the state of Texas. And I need them now." The next day, Wallace drove me to a tower of glass and steel that pierced the downtown Austin skyline. The lobby was a vast cavern of Italian marble and silent, expensive art. Men and women with sharp suits and sharper faces moved with a silent, urgent purpose. I, in a simple new suit Wallace had provided, felt like an imposter. But the feeling was fading, replaced by a cold, hard focus. We rode a silent, high-speed elevator to the top floor. The penthouse. The doors opened not onto a hallway, but directly into a reception area. The name on the glass wall in simple, brutal letters read, Blackwell. A receptionist directed us to a corner office. The door was open. Ms. Blackwell was not what I expected. She was about 45, dressed in a severe, perfectly tailored dark gray suit. She stood behind a massive glass desk, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city spread below her. My city. When we entered, she didn't turn. "Mr. Wallace," she said, her voice clear and precise. "Ms. Blackwell, this is Daniel Pierce." She turned slowly. Her eyes were dark and piercing. They swept over me from my new shoes to my still too long hair. It wasn't a look of welcome. It was an appraisal, like a predator sizing up prey. She didn't offer to shake my hand. She didn't ask me to sit. She walked back to her desk and tapped a single finger on a file. My file. "Mr. Pierce," she said. Her voice was flat. "Mr. Wallace has paid a very significant retainer for this meeting. My time is billed at $2,000 an hour. I do not like my time to be wasted." She looked at me, her expression a mask of professional ice. "I have read the court documents. I have read the judge's ruling. And according to the great state of Texas, you are not in a legal sense competent. The court record says you suffer from cognitive decline. It says you are incapable of managing your own affairs. It says you are, for all legal intents and purposes, not here." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. "So before we go any further, you need to tell me, am I speaking to Daniel Pierce, the man who built half this city? Or am I wasting my time and Mr. Edward Pierce's money on a legally declared incompetent old man who doesn't even have the standing to hire me?" I didn't answer her. I didn't waste time on feelings or explanations. Her challenge was a test, and I knew exactly how to answer it. I simply walked past her, picked up a red dry erase marker from the tray, and turned to the massive gleaming white wall that wasn't covered by a window. It was her whiteboard. "They say I'm confused." I said, my voice quiet, but it echoed in the perfect acoustics of the high-rise office. "They say I'm cognitively impaired, so let me show you what an impaired mind looks like." I uncapped the marker. The sharp scent of the ink was a familiar smell. I drew a box in the center of the board. "Pierce Properties," I wrote inside it. For the next 30 minutes, I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I didn't speak about my family, or my pain, or my time on the street. I spoke only in the language of numbers, of law, and of assets. The fog in my head was gone, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. The man who had been fumbling with the dumpster lock was gone. The CEO was back. I drew a second box. "RC Holdings, Delaware LLC." I drew an arrow from my company to theirs. "Transfer 1, I said, my voice gaining strength. 3 prime downtown lots. Appraised value $27 million. Sale price $6 million. The stated reason for the sale, liquidation of underperforming assets to maintain solvency. A lie. They were our most valuable undeveloped holdings." I drew a third box. "New York conglomerate." I drew an arrow from RC Holdings to that box. 3 days later. Sale price $24 million. Net profit $18 million funneled from RC Holdings to 2 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I wrote the account numbers on the board from memory. I didn't stop there. I drew more boxes. Shell Company 2. Consulting. Billed Pierce Properties for $2 million in advisory fees last year. The registered agent is a law firm in the same building as Ryan's Golf Club. I filled the board. It was a spider's web of transactions, dates, account numbers, and names. It was the anatomy of their crime laid bare. I stepped back from the board. "They used interstate wire transfers to move the money from the sale," I said, turning to face Blackwell. "That's a violation of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1443. Wire fraud. Maximum sentence 20 years. I pointed to another box. They used the U.S. mail to file false asset set reports with the court to justify the sales. That's a violation of Section 1341. Mail fraud. I tapped the marker on the first box. And my personal favorite. They used the fraudulent $6 million sale to declare a massive capital loss for Pierce Properties, offsetting legitimate gains. They didn't just defraud me. I looked her dead in the eyes. They defrauded the Internal Revenue Service. That is felony tax evasion. Title 26 U.S. Code Section 7201. I put the cap back on the marker. The click was loud in the silent room. I looked at Blackwell. She wasn't looking at me. She was standing, her arms crossed, staring at the whiteboard. Her eyes were moving rapidly, scanning every box, every arrow, every statute number I had written. She was reading the complex diagram as easily as I had written it. She walked closer to the board, tracing the line from RC Holdings to the Caymans with one long painted fingernail. She was silent for a full 30 seconds. Then she turned around. The icy mask of professional doubt was gone. Her eyes were no longer cold. They were hot. They were shining. And for the first time I saw a smile spread across her face. It was not a warm smile. It was the most terrifying, beautiful smile I had ever seen. It was the smile of a great white shark that had just scented a blood trail in the water. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice now a low predatory purr. "They made a fatal, fatal mistake." "What's that?" I asked. She nodded toward the board, a map of her new multi-million-dollar lawsuit. "They thought you were old, so they treated you like you were stupid," she said. "But they forgot one very important thing." She pointed a finger at me. "They forgot that you are better at this than they will ever be." Blackwell hit an intercom button on her desk. "Clear the rest of my day," she commanded, her voice sharp. "And get my lead investigator in here. Now." She turned back to me, all business. "Mr. Pierce, your whiteboard diagram is excellent," she said, nodding toward my work. "The financial case is strong. It's more than strong, it's a slam dunk on the fraud charges. But it's also complicated. It will take months, maybe years, to fight in civil court. They will file motions. They will delay. They will appeal." She began to pace, a caged predator. "Their entire defense rests on one single point, that you were and are mentally incompetent. As long as that court order stands, they will argue that you don't have the standing to sue them. They'll say you're a confused old man being manipulated by outside parties like Mr. Wallace." And she stopped and looked at me. "We can't just attack the fortress. We have to blow up the foundation. We have to destroy the credibility of the man who gave them the legal right to rob you in the first place." "Mercer," I said, the name tasting like acid. "Dr. Mercer," she confirmed. "We have to neutralize him, and we have to do it fast. We can't sue him for malpractice. That's not our goal. We need to prove he committed fraud. We need to prove he lied to the court." She picked up the personal binder from my war room, the one Wallace had given her. She flipped through the few pages inside, her eyes scanning. "Mr. Wallace's investigators were good," she said, tapping a page. "Dr. Mercer has weaknesses. He has a 6-figure gambling debt to a casino in Louisiana. And according to this surveillance report, he has a taste for expensive companionship." A cold, thin smile touched her lips. "He's in debt, and he has poor impulse control," she said. "That is a combination we can use." The plan was ruthless and elegant. Blackwell didn't just want to catch him. She wanted him to hang himself with his own words. Her lead investigator was a woman in her late 30s named Diana. She was not just attractive. She was disarming. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like the only person in the world. She was the perfect bait. Her cover story: she was the niece of a wealthy, aging tech mogul recently moved to Austin to help manage his affairs. Her first visit to Dr. Mercer was a simple new patient appointment. She complained of anxiety stress from her new responsibilities and trouble sleeping. She was charming, wealthy, and just vulnerable enough. Mercer, seeing a high-value client, was all professional sympathy. He prescribed her some mild sleeping aids and booked a follow-up. Blackwell and I listened to the audio from a surveillance van parked down the street. "He's comfortable," Blackwell noted. "He sees her as a new source of income. Now we make him greedy." On the second visit a week later, Diana began to lay the trap. It's not just me, doctor," Diana said, her voice trembling slightly. We watched the tiny, grainy video feed from the button camera on her blouse. "It's my uncle. I'm so worried about him." "Tell me," Mercer said, leaning forward, his voice dripping with faux concern. He's just acting so strangely," she whispered. "He's 68, he's built an empire, and now he's talking about giving it all away. He wants to donate millions to a university just out of the blue. He's forgetting things. He's becoming erratic. The rest of the family is terrified he's going to bankrupt himself. That he's, losing it." Mercer's eyes on the video feed showed a flicker of recognition. This was a story he'd heard before. He was on familiar ground. "That must be very difficult for you," he said, steepling his fingers. "Cognitive issues in high-functioning individuals can be complex." "That's just it," Diana said, seizing the opening. "We need to help him, to protect him from himself. But we don't know how." Mercer nodded. "These situations are very delicate. Legally, it often requires a professional medical evaluation to assess his capacity." He had set the hook himself. The final visit was 3 days later. Diana was visibly distressed. "Doctor, we can't wait. He tried to buy a vintage airplane yesterday. He doesn't even fly. The family needs to step in. We need to get control of his finances, for his own good. But our family lawyer said we can't do anything without a medical declaration. Someone to tell the court that he's not stable." She leaned in her voice, a conspiratorial whisper. "We need a doctor who understands the delicacy of the situation. Someone who can guide the process. My family is prepared to be very, very grateful for that kind of expert consultation." She placed a thick, expensive-looking envelope on his desk. "This is for your time, a retainer for your discretion." Blackwell and I held our breath. We watched on the monitor as Mercer's eyes flicked from Diana's face to the envelope. He didn't touch it. Not yet. His greed was fighting his caution. "Diana," he said, trying to sound professional, "what you're asking, it's not a simple thing." "We know," she said. "We just need to know if it's possible." This was the moment. The doctor's gambling debts, which Wallace's file had detailed, must have been screaming in his ear. He looked at the envelope again. He sighed a small, greedy sound. He slid the envelope off the desk and into an open drawer. He had taken the bait. "It is possible," Mercer said, his voice now low and confidential. He was no longer a doctor. He was a co-conspirator. "The process is straightforward," he began. "It's not about one single test. It's about building a narrative for the court." I stopped breathing. He was giving her the playbook. My playbook. "First," he said, "you, the family, provide written testimony, anecdotes. Times he seemed confused, forgot names, made strange decisions. The airplane is perfect. The donation is even better. It doesn't even have to be perfectly accurate. It just has to sound convincing." He was describing Laura's lie about my grandson. "Then," he continued, "I bring him in for a cognitive evaluation. The tests, they are very subjective. It's all in the interpretation. I can ask leading questions. I can note his hesitation as cognitive lag. I can interpret his frustration as emotional instability. I can build a medical report that paints a very clear picture of a man who is no longer fit to make his own decisions." He smiled a thin, self-satisfied smirk. "It's very easy as long as everyone is on the same page." The judge sees a concerned family and a detailed report from a medical expert. They'll grant the conservatorship every time. It's a clean, simple process. He had just confessed. He had just admitted on high-definition video and audio that his entire professional opinion was for sale. Diana stood up, wiping away a fake tear. "Thank you, doctor. You've given us hope. I'll be in touch." She walked out of the office. The moment the clinic door shut behind her, Blackwell closed the laptop. The van was silent. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Her face was made of ice. She picked up her phone and dialed her office. "He's on tape," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Admitting to fraud. Admitting to taking the bribe. I want a subpoena issued for Dr. Mercer. I want him in my office for a deposition tomorrow morning. And send a copy of that video and the audio of him and Ryan Pierce to his personal attorney right now. Let him stew in it overnight." While Dr. Mercer was sweating, knowing his world was about to end, Ms. Blackwell unleashed the second wave of our attack. This one wasn't a secret sting operation. It was a frontal assault delivered in broad daylight. I was in the war room reviewing the very files they thought were hidden forever when I knew it was happening. I pictured it. A professional process server, a man with a blank face and empty eyes walking up the marble steps of my house. The house Catherine had taken from me. I pictured her answering the door, probably in a silk robe, annoyed at the interruption to her morning coffee. She would see the man, see the envelope, and her first reaction would be irritation. "Mrs. Catherine Pierce," the man would say, his voice flat. She would nod, impatient. "Yes." "You have been served." He would hand her the thick envelope and walk away, his job done. She would close the door, confused. She would open it, thinking it was perhaps a formality from the divorce, some loose end. And then she would read the first page. She would see my name, Daniel Pierce, as the plaintiff. And she would see the defendant, Catherine Pierce, and Ryan Pierce. At the same time, miles away in my office, a second server was walking past the expensive CEO sign on Ryan's door. He wouldn't be as polite. He'd find Ryan on the phone, probably bullying some broker, feeling powerful. "Ryan Pierce." My son would wave him off, annoyed. "Get out, I'm busy." The server wouldn't move. "Mr. Ryan Pierce, you have been served." He would drop the identical envelope on the desk and turn to leave. Ryan would stare at it, furious at the interruption. Then he would see my name. He might even laugh, thinking, "What can the old man do?" And then both of them, in their separate castles built on my stolen life, would read the second page. The subpoena duces tecum, a demand for documents, and they would see the two words that would turn their blood to ice. RC Holdings. It was a name that should not exist outside their private conversations. It was their secret, their triumphant whispered joke, the vehicle for their $18 million theft. To see that name, RC Holdings LLC, typed in stark black legal font, it wouldn't just be a shock. It would be an impossibility. It would be a ghost story. This wasn't a random lawsuit. This wasn't a confused old man asking for scraps. This was a document that proved without a shadow of a doubt that I knew. I knew the name. I knew about the accounts. I knew everything. The panic would be instant. The foundations of their new rich lives would crack. Their confidence would shatter. There would be only one single terrified question screaming in their minds. How does he know? The panic must have set in almost immediately. In our surveillance van, which now had a legal warrant to monitor their communications thanks to the fraud evidence, we didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes after the server confirmed delivery to Ryan's office, his phone was active. The call was to Catherine. We listened, and it was the sweet, sweet sound of desperation. "Mom?" Ryan's voice was high, almost a shriek. He wasn't the calm, cool CEO anymore. He was a terrified boy. He knows the name. Catherine's voice was sharp, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. What are you talking about? Ryan calmed down. What name? RC Holdings. Mom, RC. It's on a subpoena. He's asking for all the records, all of them. How is this possible? How does he know that name? There was a sharp intake of breath on Catherine's end. That's impossible, she whispered. No one knows that name. No one. Well, he does. Ryan was pacing. I could hear the sound of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floor of his office. How, Mom? How did a homeless old man, a confused old man, get this? Who is helping him? He has a lawyer. A good lawyer. Calm down, Catherine snapped, her composure returning. It's a bluff. It has to be. He's got nothing. He's trying to scare us, to shake us down for money. This doesn't feel like a bluff, Ryan shouted. This is a federal subpoena. They're asking for tax records, Mom. This is bad. This is really bad. Listen to me, Ryan, Catherine said, her voice dropping to a low, cold command. You will not fall apart. He is a legally incompetent person. This lawsuit won't even be allowed in court. It's a fishing expedition. But just in case, you need to call Mercer. Now. Mercer, why? Because Mercer is the entire foundation, you idiot, she hissed. As long as Mercer's diagnosis holds, he's incompetent, and this entire thing goes away. Call him. Tell him what happened. Tell him to make sure his story is solid. Tell him to bury the old man in medical files. Make sure he keeps his mouth shut. It was the worst possible order she could have given. It was the move that would checkmate their entire game. Because as Catherine was giving that order, a package had just been delivered to Dr. Mercer's home office. He too had just been served with a subpoena for deposition. And right on top of the legal documents was a small black USB flash drive. The one containing a high-definition video of him taking a bribe from Diana, and a crystal-clear audio file of him and Ryan Pierce conspiring to commit fraud. It was already too late. Dr. Mercer couldn't keep his mouth shut, because we were about to rip it open. The next morning, I was not in the war room. Ms. Blackwell had insisted I be present. I sat at the long polished mahogany table in her main conference room. It was a room designed for intimidation. On one side, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. On the other, a blank wall. It felt less like a law office and more like a high-altitude interrogation chamber. I was wearing another suit, this one dark charcoal. I looked the part of the CEO. I felt the part. I was no longer an observer. I was a principal in this fight. Wallace sat to my right, silent, holding a file. Blackwell sat at the head of the table, her hands folded. She was perfectly still, a predator, waiting patiently by the water's edge. The door opened. Dr. Mercer walked in, followed by a man I assumed was his attorney. Mercer was a wreck. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, let alone one night. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His face was a sickly pale gray, beaded with a fine layer of sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, and darting first to Blackwell, then to me. When our eyes met, I didn't look away. I didn't show anger. I showed nothing. I just stared. He flinched and broke contact, immediately fumbling with his briefcase. His lawyer was the opposite. He was calm, professional, and radiated an aura of deep, profound unhappiness. He was a man who had been woken up in the middle of the night by a frantic, guilty client who had just watched his career go up in flames on a USB drive. He was here not to win, but to control the damage, to find the least painful way to surrender. They took their seats on the opposite section of the table. A court reporter was already set up at the end, her fingers poised. A videographer in the corner adjusted his camera, the small red light glowing. The silence in the room was suffocating. It was the sterile, heavy silence of an operating room before the first cut. Mercer's lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling papers. "My client is here as requested," he said to Blackwell, his voice tight. Blackwell didn't even look at him. Her gaze was locked on Mercer. She let the silence stretch for another 10 seconds, the tension building, letting Mercer and all the terror peak. Finally, she spoke. "Let's go on the record." The court reporter's fingers began to fly. The red light on the video camera glowed. "Please state your name and professional address for the record." Blackwell began, her voice a cold monotone. "Dr. Robert Mercer." He said, his voice a little too loud. He cleared his throat. "Austin Diagnostics, 1200 Medical Parkway." "Dr. Mercer, you were the primary care physician for my client, Mr. Daniel Pierce, for approximately 12 years, correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Mercer said. His lawyer sat beside him, rigid as a statue. "And on October 14th, 2 years ago, you submitted a sworn declaration to the Travis County Probate Court regarding Mr. Pierce's medical condition." "I did." "In that declaration, you stated, and I quote, 'It is my professional medical opinion that Mr. Daniel Pierce is suffering from significant cognitive decline consistent with early-onset dementia, rendering him incapable of managing his own financial and personal affairs.' Is that correct?" "Yes," Mercer said. He was visibly gaining confidence. This was his territory. These were his words, his diagnoses. He had clearly rehearsed this. He believed this was a battle of medical opinion, and he was the only expert in the room. "Dr. Mercer," Blackwell said, her voice dangerously neutral, "can you please explain to this deposition in detail the medical basis for that diagnosis?" This was the opening he had prepared for. He sat up straighter. He put on the mask of the concerned, authoritative doctor. "Of course," he said, clasping his hands on the table. "The diagnosis was not based on a single event, but on a multifactorial assessment. It was a longitudinal observation of progressive cognitive deficits." He was good. He sounded professional, even compassionate. He used all the right words. "My assessment was initiated based on urgent concerns expressed by the patient's immediate family." He continued, gesturing vaguely toward me. His wife Catherine and his son Ryan both provided detailed corroborating accounts of Mr. Pierce's erratic behavior, memory lapses, and paranoia. He was building his wall brick by brick. They reported instances of him forgetting familiar names, becoming lost, and expressing a desire to liquidate sound financial assets for questionable purposes. These family reports are a critical diagnostic tool. He then described the tests he had given me. The patient's performance on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment was concerning. He exhibited significant deficits in delayed recall and executive function. When combined with the family's testimony, the clinical picture was undeniable. He finished his explanation and leaned back, a faint, arrogant smirk on his lips. He had delivered his lines perfectly. He had cited the family. He had used the medical jargon. In his mind, he had just built an impenetrable fortress. He looked at Blackwell as if to say, "Your move." He genuinely believed he was in control. He had no idea he had just walked directly into the kill zone. Ms. Blackwell let Mercer's self-satisfied explanation hang in the air. She didn't challenge his medical terms. She didn't argue about the cognitive tests. She just waited. She let him sit in the silence, basking in what he thought was his victory. After a long 10 seconds, she finally moved. She held up one hand, a sharp, clean gesture. "We are now off the record," she said. The court reporter's fingers stopped. The videographer's red light went off. The official part of the deposition was over. The execution was about to begin. Dr. Mercer's lawyer tensed up. He knew this move. This was where the real fight happened. Dr. Mercer, however, still looked smug. He thought he had won the round. Ms. Blackwell reached down and picked up a sleek, thin iPad from her bag. She didn't say a word. She just unlocked the screen and placed it flat on the mahogany table. Then, with one finger, she slid it across the polished surface. It glided smoothly, silently, coming to a perfect stop directly in front of Dr. Mercer. "Before we go back on the record, Doctor," Blackwell said, her voice dropping to a low, conversational, and utterly lethal tone. I find it's always helpful to get a second opinion. Mercer looked confused. A second opinion, I am the... This, Blackwell said, is a recording from a new patient of yours, a Diana. I believe you met with her just yesterday. You found her compelling. The blood drained from Mercer's face. The gray, sickly pallor returned instantly. His eyes snapped from Blackwell's face to the iPad, then to his lawyer, who was now staring at the device with a look of pure, undiluted horror. I don't know what you're... Mercer began to stammer. Play it, Blackwell commanded. With a visibly trembling hand, Mercer's lawyer reached over and tapped the play icon in the center of the screen, and the screen lit up. The video was high definition. The audio was crystal clear. We all watched. We saw Diana. We saw Mercer. We saw him listen to her story about her uncle. And then we saw him accept the thick envelope of cash and slide it into his desk drawer. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Mercer's own voice captured on the recording, explaining with clinical precision how to build a narrative, how to interpret the tests, how to ask leading questions, how to commit a perfect calculated fraud. It's very easy, his voice on the recording concluded, as long as everyone is on the same page. The video ended, returning the screen to black. Mercer was no longer breathing. He was just staring wide-eyed at his own reflection in the dark screen. He was a dead man. He just hadn't stopped moving yet. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's air conditioning. Mercer was staring at the black reflective screen, but he wasn't seeing himself. He was seeing the total and complete destruction of his life. His face, which had been a sickly gray, was now slick with a sudden cold sweat. He made a small choking sound, like a man who had just been punched in the stomach. He looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide and screaming with panic. His lawyer was a professional. He didn't panic. He just looked tired. He looked at Blackwell, then at me with an expression of profound resignation. He had just seen his client not only admit to malpractice, but to a conspiracy to commit a federal crime, all recorded in high-definition video. There was no defense, Drew. There was no spin. There was only surrender. He placed a calm hand on Mercer's trembling arm, who flinched at the touch. Ms. Blackwell, the lawyer said, his voice a flat, defeated monotone. We need a moment. Off the record. Take all the time you need, Blackwell said, her voice devoid of any triumph. It was the cold, flat sound of a completed transaction. The lawyer practically had to lift Mercer out of his chair. The two of them stumbled out of the conference room, the door clicking shut behind them, leaving us in silence again. 10 minutes passed. 10 minutes of silence. I looked at Wallace. He was staring at the skyline. I looked at Blackwell. She was checking her email on her phone as if she were just waiting for a lunch reservation. The door opened again. It was a different man who walked in. The lawyer was the same, but Mercer was gone. In his place was a shell. He was slumped, his tie undone, his eyes red and empty. He sat down heavily, his hands limp at his sides. He was a broken man. His lawyer spoke, still off the record. Ms. Blackwell, my client is prepared to cooperate. Fully. I thought he might be, Blackwell said. In exchange for his full and truthful testimony, we would request that you do not file a criminal complaint personally, and that you submit a letter to the state medical board on his behalf acknowledging his cooperation if he is truthful. You have a deal, Blackwell said instantly. She looked at the court reporter. We are back on the record. The videographer's red light came on. The reporter's fingers were poised. Blackwell's eyes locked onto Mercer. Dr. Mercer, I ask you again, was your diagnosis of Daniel Pierce based on sound medical practice? Mercer swallowed. He stared at the table. His lawyer nudged him. "No," he whispered. "Please speak up for the record, doctor." "No," Mercer said, his voice cracking. "It was not. In fact, Dr. Mercer, you were paid to provide that diagnosis. Were you not?" "Yes." "Paid by whom?" "Ryan Pierce." "And what were you paid, Doctor?" A car, a Porsche, and cash." "And the medical evaluation you submitted to the court, the one claiming Mr. Pierce was incompetent. Was that document a lie?" There was a long pause. Mercer's whole body slumped as if the last string holding him up had been cut. "Yes." He said the word barely audible. "It was a lie. All of it. The tests were faked. The diagnosis was a fabrication. It was fraud. It was done." With that one word, the entire legal foundation of Catherine and Ryan's empire, the conservatorship that had stolen my life, had been obliterated. It had all been built on sand, and the tide was now coming in. With Mercer's confession secured, the first pillar had fallen. Now it was time to topple the next. Ms. Blackwell didn't file the fraud charges. Not yet. That was a bazooka, and she wanted to use a scalpel first. Instead, her office sent a formal legal invitation to Catherine Ryan and their lawyers. The invitation was for a voluntary mediation conference, a peace negotiation, a chance to resolve all outstanding disputes amicably. Their lawyers would have been delighted. They would have told Catherine and Ryan that this was a sign of weakness, that the old man and his new mysterious lawyer had realized they had no real case. They were probably desperate for a quick settlement. They probably thought they could make me go away for a fraction of what they had stolen. They thought I was coming to beg. The meeting was set for the following week, in Blackwell's conference room, the same room where Mercer had confessed. I was there an hour early. I wasn't wearing a borrowed suit. Mr. Wallace had taken me to a proper tailor. The suit I was wearing was a custom navy blue pinstripe. It was worth $5,000. My shoes were polished. My hair was cut. I was clean-shaven. I was not the man in the alley. I was Daniel Pierce. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, not at the side, at the head. Blackwell sat to my right, Wallace to my left. We didn't speak, we just waited. At 10 a.m., sharp, the door opened. Catherine Ryan and their lawyer walked in, and behind them, looking small and nervous, my daughter Laura. They were in their element. Catherine looked bored, annoyed, and incredibly arrogant. Ryan was smirking, whispering something to his lawyer, already celebrating his victory. He looked like the king of the world, a son who had successfully and permanently replaced his father. Their lawyer saw us first. He stopped, confused. Ryan and Catherine bumped into him, still laughing. "What's the holdup?" Ryan said, looking up. And then he saw me. His smirk. It didn't just fade. It froze. It shattered. His mouth hung open. His eyes went wide, but not just with recognition, with sheer, profound, bone-deep confusion. Catherine, seeing the look on her son's face, pushed past him. "Ryan, what is wrong with—" She saw me. Her hand, the one holding her $1,000 purse, went slack. The purse didn't fall, but her fingers uncurled. Her eyes were the real show. They went from me to the suit, to my clean-shaven face, to the power lawyer Ms. Blackwell sitting next to me, then back to me. She was trying to process an impossible image. She was looking at a ghost who was wearing a more expensive suit than her son. A ghost who was sitting at the head of a table where he clearly belonged. The man she had left for dead in an alley was sitting in front of her, looking like a king. Catherine's lawyer, a man named Bennett, recovered first. He cleared his throat and tried to take control of the meeting he had completely misunderstood. "Ms. Blackwell, Mr. Pierce, we are surprised to see you here, Daniel. We are, of course, happy to discuss a reasonable stipend to ensure your comfort. My clients are prepared to be generous. Ryan's smirk returned, though it was weaker now. He thought this was about money. He thought I was here to beg. Ms. Blackwell let the insulting offer hang in the air. She didn't even look at Bennett. She looked at me. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. End this. She turned her gaze back to the lawyer. A stipend, she repeated, her voice flat. Generous, I see. She leaned forward, her voice dropping, but it filled the room. There will be no stipend, and you can stop calling this a mediation. This is a notification. Bennett looked confused. Notification of what? Notification, Mr. Bennett, Blackwell said, that as of 1 hour ago, the conservatorship of Daniel Pierce has been declared null and void. The color drained from Catherine's face. Ryan's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, idiotic gape. What? You can't? That's impossible. We have a court order. You had a court order, Blackwell corrected him, her voice like ice. It was based on the medical testimony of a Dr. Robert Mercer. A testimony that Dr. Mercer, in a sworn deposition yesterday, admitted was a complete fabrication. He has confessed on video to accepting a bribe from you, Mr. Pierce. She nodded at Ryan, in exchange for committing medical fraud. Ryan's face went from pale to a deep mottled red. That's a lie. Is it? Blackwell slid a second iPad down the table. That's a copy of his full-signed confession. I'd be happy to play the tape of you offering him a Porsche. Ryan looked like he had been shot. But Catherine was already looking for the next angle. So what? She hissed, her eyes narrowing at me. So the old man isn't confused. It doesn't matter. The assets are ours. The divorce is final. This changes nothing. You're right, Blackwell said. It doesn't change the divorce. But it does change this. She reached down and placed a thick bound document on the table. It made a heavy final thud. This, she said, tapping the cover, is a pre-filing copy of a federal lawsuit, citing violations of Title 18, Section 1443, wire fraud, and Section 1341, mail fraud. She slid a second identical copy to their lawyer. And just for fun, we've included a RICO charge. Racketeering. You see, the court found you set up a criminal enterprise, RC Holdings, to defraud Mr. Pierce. Catherine didn't understand the words. But Laura, my daughter, who had been silent, her face pale, finally understood. Her eyes went wide with pure animal terror. She wasn't a concerned daughter. She was a co-conspirator. Mom, Laura's voice was a tiny squeak. Mom, what is she saying? Wire fraud. Racketeering. I thought. You said it was all legal. You said you were just protecting the assets. She looked at Ryan, her face crumbling. Ryan, you told me it was just paperwork. She suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly. Her whole body was shaking. I'm not going to jail, she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. You made me lie in court. You both said it was the only way. I'm not going to jail for you, I won't. All eyes turned to Laura. Her sobs were loud, ugly, and desperate. She was no longer the poised, heartbroken daughter from the courtroom. She was a cornered animal, and in her panic she had just implicated her mother and brother in a federal crime. Catherine, seeing this, turned on her. Laura, shut your mouth. You don't know what you're saying. You're hysterical. No! Laura shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at her mother. You made me. You told me it was just a formality. I had been silent. I had watched them all. I had watched the arrogance, the panic, and the betrayal. Now I spoke. My voice wasn't loud. It was quiet, and it cut through Laura's hysterics like a surgeon's scalpel. "Laura!" She stopped, her breath catching in a sob. Her tear-filled eyes, so much like her mother's, locked on mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Laura," I repeated, my voice calm and cold. "In court. You testified under oath that I was so confused. I had forgotten your son's name. My grandson." Her face went blank. The panic was replaced by a new dawning horror. She knew where this was going. "You said I forgot his name," I continued, leaning forward just an inch. "You cried. The judge believed you. It was very convincing." I looked at her. Really looked at her. "Tell me, Laura, just to clear the air, what is my grandson's name?" She stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. She was searching her memory, not for the truth, but for the lie she had told, and she couldn't find it. I, she stammered, looking at Catherine for help. "What's his name, Laura?" I pressed, my voice unyielding. It's Max." She finally blurted out the name, sounding like a question. "His name is Max." A dead silence fell on the room. I slowly, very slowly shook my head. "No, Laura," I said, and my voice was laced with a pity that was more terrible than anger. "His name is Leo. You couldn't even be bothered to remember the lie you sold your father for." That was it. That was the blow that broke her. She let out a sound, a high-pitched, wounded wail, and collapsed back into her chair, covering her face, her entire body shaking in a paroxysm of guilt and self-destruction. Their lawyer, Bennett, just sat there, his face ashen. He was looking at the end of his career. But Catherine was different. I watched her face. I saw her look at her son, a fool. I saw her look at her daughter, a sobbing wreck. I saw her look at the federal lawsuit on the table. And in that moment, she knew the legal fight was over. She had lost. And in that same moment, she pivoted. She found one last weapon in her arsenal, the scorched earth. She suddenly let out a laugh. It was a harsh, ugly barking sound. "All right, Daniel," she sneered, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You win. You clever old bastard. You beat us. You get it all back." She spread her hands wide. "So go on, take it." She leaned across the table, her eyes glittering with a new vicious triumph. "Go back to your precious company. Go back to Pierce Properties, because we've spent the last 2 years running it into the ground. It's nothing but a shell. Daniel, we've mortgaged every property, we've maxed out every line of credit. The 18 million you're so angry about, that's gone. It's all gone, the house, the cars, the accounts. We bled it dry." She stood up, her voice rising to a triumphant shriek. "Congratulations, Daniel. You're competent, you're free. And you're now the proud owner of a $50 million debt. You're ruined. You're even more broke now than you were in that alley." She smiled a wide, terrible smile. "You're right back where you started. You're just a homeless old man in a nice suit." Catherine's voice echoed in the room, filled with the triumphant, ugly sound of her hatred. "You're just a homeless old man in a nice suit." She was breathing heavily, her face flushed, a wild, victorious light in her eyes. She had finally won. She had destroyed me. She waited for me to scream, to cry, to break. So I did the one thing she could not possibly have expected. I smiled. It was not a big smile. It was a small, quiet, pitying smile. I looked at this woman, this creature consumed by her own venom, and I just smiled. Then I slowly, calmly turned my head to the man who had been sitting at the corner of the table, silent as a statue for this entire meeting. Mr. Wallace. He caught my eye. I gave him a small nod. "Your turn." Mr. Wallace, who had been an invisible administrator, suddenly became the most powerful man in the room. He stood up slowly. He was not a flashy lawyer like Blackwell. He was a man of trusts, of old money, of quiet, irreversible power. He calmly buttoned his suit jacket. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked at Catherine, who was still sneering, though a flicker of confusion was now in her eyes. "You are absolutely correct, Mrs. Pierce," Mr. Wallace said, his voice calm and pleasant, as if discussing the weather. "You are 100% right. Pierce Properties is, as you say, a shell. It is worthless." Catherine's smile faltered. This was not the reaction she wanted. That's right," she stammered. "It's ruined, indeed." Wallace continued walking slowly toward the center of the table. "Our forensic accountants hired by Mr. Edward Pierce's trust confirmed as much 6 weeks ago. They found the shell companies. They found the illegal transfers. They found the massive crippling debt you and your son had loaded onto the company. A $50 million debt, as you so accurately stated." "So what?" Ryan sneered, trying to get his confidence back. "What's your point? He's bankrupt. We win this too." Wallace almost looked sad. "The point, Mr. Pierce," he said, "is that you are once again thinking one move at a time, while my late client was thinking 5 moves ahead." He stopped and placed his hands on the back of a chair. "You see," Wallace said, "when the trust discovered that Pierce Properties was fundamentally bankrupt and that its only real assets were the massive loans you'd taken out against it, we had a decision to make. What do you do with a company that is $50 million in debt?" He looked at Catherine. "And we came to a simple conclusion. 30 days ago, the trust operating through a third-party acquisitions firm quietly bought all of that debt. Every single dollar of it. From every single bank you borrowed from." The room went utterly, completely silent. Catherine and Ryan just stared. Their faces were blank. They were trying to process the words, but they just couldn't. It was like telling a dog it could fly. The concept didn't exist in their brains. Their lawyer Bennett, however, understood. His face, which was already pale, turned the color of ash. He looked like he was going to be physically ill. He slumped in his chair, a low groan escaping his lips. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What?" Catherine snapped, turning on him. "What does that mean? What is he talking about?" Mr. Wallace decided to explain it in terms she would understand. "It means, Mrs. Pierce, that we are the bank. It means that Pierce Properties, it doesn't owe $50 million to a dozen different banks. It owes $50 million to me." He let that sink in. "And it's not just the company," Wallace continued, his voice still gentle. "The trust also purchased your personal loans. The mortgage on your house, Mrs. Pierce, we own it. The $500,000 loan for your Bentley, we own that too. The unsecured line of credit Ryan used to buy that Porsche, we own that." He looked at the 3 of them, the stunned wife, the idiotic, arrogant son, the sobbing, broken daughter. "Normally," he said, "we would be happy to let you continue making your payments. But—" He looked at Ms. Blackwell. Ms. Blackwell spoke, picking up the thread. "But now, we have a federal lawsuit. We have a signed confession of fraud from Dr. Mercer. We have clear evidence of a criminal RICO enterprise. And when you commit federal wire fraud, you violate the default clauses on every loan agreement you have ever signed." The final hammer fell. Wallace smiled a cold corporate smile. "Which means, Mrs. Pierce, all of that debt. The $50 million from the company, the mortgage on your house, the loan on your car, it is all due." He glanced at his watch. "Not next month, not tomorrow. It is due immediately. Today." The color drained from Catherine's face. The arrogance, the hatred, the triumph. It all vanished, replaced by a raw, hollow, animal terror. She finally understood. They weren't just being sued. They were being deleted. They weren't just going to lose the stolen money. They were going to lose everything. Their house, their cars, their bank accounts. They were going to be worse than broke. They were going to be destitute. They were, in a word, ruined. Ms. Blackwell slid one final document across the table. It was thin. Only one page. "This is a general release," she said, her voice flat. "You will sign over 100% of your shares in both Pierce Properties and the criminal enterprise known as RC Holdings back to Mr. Pierce effective immediately. You will agree to vacate the premises of his house by 5 p.m. tomorrow. You will sign." "Or what?" Catherine whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Or," Blackwell said, "I will pick up this phone and I will call the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in addition to the mountain of evidence I am sending them, I will add Mr. Daniel Pierce's personal heartbreaking testimony to their criminal case against you, and I will make it my personal professional mission to ensure you, your son, and your daughter spend the next 20 years in a federal prison." Their lawyer Bennett didn't even read the paper. He grabbed it, found a pen, and pushed it in front of Ryan. "Sign it, Ryan," he hissed. Ryan, his hand trembling so hard he could barely hold the pen, signed. Bennett pushed it to Catherine. Her hands were shaking too. She looked at me, her eyes finally truly defeated. She signed. It was over. It was all mine. I sat in Ms. Blackwell's conference room. The last time I was here, the air had been thick with tension, with the unspoken violence of a legal execution. Now, a week later, the room was just a room. Quiet. Professional. The war was over, and we were just signing the peace treaty. The table in front of us was covered in documents neatly stacked. They represented the sum total of my former life and my new one. The last 7 days had been a whirlwind of pure logistical power. True to their word, Catherine and Ryan had vacated the house. Blackwell's associates, not mine, had stood on the lawn checking off items on a list as a moving van, which Catherine had been forced to pay for, loaded up their personal belongings. The Bentley was gone. The Porsche was gone. Their bank accounts were frozen pending the federal investigation. My company, Pierce Properties, was now officially mine again. Catherine's parting shot had been correct in a way. The company was a husk bled dry. But she had missed the point. It was a clean husk. Thanks to Wallace, the massive $50 million debt they had strapped to it was no longer a liability. It was an asset held by my brother's trust. Pierce Properties was, for the first time in years, completely, totally, and beautifully clean. "This is the last one, Mr. Pierce," Blackwell said. Her voice was all business, but there was a flicker of respect in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was the final document, the one that officially closed our engagement. I picked up her heavy, expensive fountain pen. I signed my name, Daniel Pierce, at the bottom. The signature was not the shaking scrawl of a victim. It was the strong, clear, decisive script of a founder. "It's done," I said, pushing the paper back to her. "It's done," she agreed, sliding it neatly into a file. "The civil case is concluded. You have your company. You have your house. You have everything." I nodded. My business with her was over, but my business in this room was not. I stood up and turned. In the corner, as he had been for the entire meeting, sat Mr. Wallace. He had been a silent observer, the quiet source of all the power in the room. Now it was his turn. He stood as I approached. He was holding the same simple gray briefcase he had been holding in the alley that night. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Mr. Wallace," I said. My voice was firm. This was not a question. It was a statement. "Today is day 58. He nodded. "Yes, it is." "The condition in my brother's will," I continued, "was clear. I was to use the resources of his trust to fight, to overturn the conservatorship and recover what was stolen from me." I gestured back to the mountain of paperwork on Blackwell's table. As of this moment, that condition has been met. The conservatorship is voided. The assets are recovered. Mercer's confession is filed. Catherine and Ryan are defeated. I have done what he asked. I looked him in the eye. I was no longer the man in the alley. I was no longer the ghost in the hotel. I was the man who had just won an impossible war. I have fulfilled the condition, Mr. Wallace. I am here to finalize my brother's estate. I am ready to accept the inheritance. Mr. Wallace looked at me. He didn't speak for a long, quiet moment. He wasn't looking at my suit. He wasn't looking at the documents. He was looking at me. He was assessing something. Then for the first time since I had met him, his professional, curt mask dissolved. He smiled. It was a small, genuine, and deeply respectful smile. He extended his hand. This time I took it. My hand was steady. His grip was firm. "Congratulations, Mr. Daniel," he said, and his voice was warm. "You did it. You absolutely did." He was still shaking my hand when he said the words that would change everything all over again. "You passed the test." I paused. My hand was still in his. "A test," I repeated. The word felt strange, out of place. "Mr. Wallace, I thought it was a condition, a legal requirement, a stipulation in the will." Wallace just smiled, that calm, respectful smile. He gently withdrew his hand. "Mr. Daniel," he said, and his voice was kind, "you're misunderstanding the entire situation. You keep calling it a test. You keep calling it a condition. You think Edward was judging you." He shook his head slowly. "He wasn't." I was confused. "What are you talking about? You said it yourself. 60 days. Fight my family. If I fail, the money goes to an animal shelter. That sounds exactly like a test." "Yes," Wallace said. "That is what I was instructed to tell you, because that was the story Edward needed you to believe. But it wasn't the truth." The room, which had felt so settled and final, was suddenly spinning again. Ms. Blackwell, for the first time, looked up from her papers, her own curiosity piqued. "Wallace," I said, "what are you— You lied to me. I presented you with a scenario, Mr. Daniel," he said, his voice precise. "A scenario your brother meticulously crafted. He was a brilliant man. A master of finance, yes, but more than that. He was a master of human nature. And he knew you. He knew my strength. He knew the man who had built this company from nothing. But he also knew your heart. He knew your capacity for forgiveness. He knew, even after everything they had done, that you still, somewhere deep inside, loved your children." I didn't say anything. "He was terrified of one thing," Wallace continued, his voice low. "Not that you would fail in this fight. He was absolutely convinced you would win. He was terrified of what would happen after you won. He was terrified that you would take your $39 million, and that Catherine or Ryan, or especially Laura, would come to you, crying, apologizing, begging for a second chance, and that you, Daniel Pierce, the man with the big broken heart, would give it to them." He looked at me with a profound, sad understanding. "And he knew that if you did, they would just do it all over again. They would take the $39 million just as they had taken the $50 million, and this time it would kill you." He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle in the room. "So he built a trap. A brilliant, perfect, ironclad trap. But the trap, Mr. Daniel, it was never for you. It was to protect you from them." I was still confused. "The animal shelter." "There is no animal shelter," Wallace said, finally opening his own briefcase. He pulled out a single different document. It was bound in a different color. That was a lie. A brilliant piece of misdirection. The animal shelter us with the story for you. It gave you a noble reason to fight. But the real will, he pushed it across the table. This is the true final codicil to your brother's will. The one only I had seen. Until today. I looked at it. The language was dense, but my eyes found the key paragraphs. It reads, Wallace said, summarizing, I leave my entire estate valued at $39 million to my beloved brother Daniel Pierce. However, he took a deep breath. This was it. However, he read, if within 60 days of my death, my brother Daniel Pierce, having been informed of this inheritance, willingly contacts attempts to reconcile with or provides any financial assistance whatsoever to his ex-wife Catherine Pierce or his children Ryan and Laura Pierce, then this entire bequest to my brother is rendered null and void. My blood ran cold. I looked at him. Null and void. So, the animal shelter. No. Wallace said, his voice a whisper. He read the final terrible, brilliant line. And in that event, the entire $39 million estate shall be transferred immediately and irrevocably to Catherine Pierce, Ryan Pierce, and Laura Pierce to be divided equally among them. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at him. I was speechless. The trap. The trap. If I had been me, if I had been the weak man my brother feared I was, if I had seen Laura crying in that conference room and said, I forgive you, if I had offered her $1, they would have gotten everything, I whispered. They would have gotten everything, Wallace confirmed. The entire $39 million. I finally understood. The sheer cold, brutal brilliance of it. The 60-day timeline. The lawsuit. Ms. Blackwell. The war room. It wasn't a test to see if I was worthy. It was a quarantine. It was a 60-day legally mandated quarantine designed to keep me safe from my own heart. He had created a scenario where to get the inheritance, I could not contact them. I could not forgive them. I had to fight them. I had to win. He had made it legally impossible for me to be the father and forced me to be the man. He didn't just give you his money, Mr. Daniel, Wallace said quietly, closing the file. He knew your weakness, so he gave you an ironclad, legally binding excuse to save yourself. I sank back into the chair, the $5,000 suit feeling like a costume. My brother, my estranged, cold, ruthless brother. He hadn't just given me an inheritance. He had given me my life. He had protected me in the only way he knew how, not with a hug, but with a brilliantly engineered legal weapon. He had in the end saved me from my own capacity for mercy. 6 months have passed. I am Daniel Pierce. I am 70 years old. I am not in an alley. I am not in a hotel room smelling of industrial soap. I am standing on a wide stone terrace 50 floors above Manhattan. The sun is setting over the Hudson River, and the city is transforming into a galaxy of lights far below me. The air is cold, sharp, and clean. I am drinking a cup of coffee, a very expensive cup of coffee from a real heavy ceramic mug. It is warm in my hands. This is Edward's penthouse. Now, it is mine. I did not go back to Austin. There was nothing there for me. After the papers were signed, Wallace and his team handled the liquidation. Pierce Properties, the company I had built and the company they had destroyed, was sold. Its assets, now owned by the trust, were dissolved. I closed that chapter of my life. I am not retired. I am not resting. My brother, in his infinite, complex wisdom, didn't just leave me his money. He left me his work. I spend my days in an office with a view of Central Park, managing the Edward Pierce Investment Fund. I am once again a CEO. I am managing $39 million, and I am turning it into 40. Then 50. The skills. The skills that built my first empire. They are sharper than they have ever been. My mind, the one they declared broken and confused, is now managing a complex portfolio of international equities. I am once again a man of purpose. I am once again myself. This morning, my assistant, a bright young woman who calls me Mr. Pierce, with genuine respect, brought me the mail. Most of it was financial reports, invitations to charity galas, and letters from banks. But there was one letter, a personal letter. The envelope was cheap, the stamp was crooked, and the handwriting was a desperate, looping scrawl. The return address was a small walk-up apartment in a bad neighborhood in Austin. It was from Laura, my daughter. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she was working 2 jobs, one in a coffee shop, one waiting tables. She wrote that Catherine and Ryan had left. They had disappeared, leaving her to face the class action lawsuits and the social ruin all by herself. She wrote that she was alone, that she was terrified, that she loved me, that she just wanted to know if I could find it in my heart to forgive her. 2 years ago, this letter would have destroyed me. A year ago, this letter would have broken my heart. Even 61 days ago, I might have hesitated. I might have remembered the little girl who held my hand, not the woman who lied on a witness stand. I read the letter through once. I saw the careful, manipulative phrases of her mother woven in with her own genuine self-pity. I saw the same weakness that had allowed her to be bought for $100,000. I stood up from my desk. I walked over to the heavy-duty paper shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the letter into the slot. The machine whined for a second, and then she was gone. I felt nothing. Not anger, not revenge, not even sadness. Just quiet. The quiet of a door that has been at long last firmly and permanently closed. I see the news from Texas. Dr. Mercer, as Blackwell had promised, lost his medical license. He is disgraced and facing his own lawsuits from other patients. Ryan and Catherine, they are not in jail, not yet. But the class action suit filed by all the other investors they defrauded has buried them. They are, as Catherine so rightly predicted, for me ruined. They are poor. They are failed. I am 70 years old. I used to believe that family was everything. I used to believe that love meant enduring, that forgiveness was a virtue without limits. I was wrong. Respect is everything, and self-respect is the foundation of it all. Without it, love is just a word for abuse. Catherine was right that night in the alley. She said no one would ever love a poor, failed old man, and she was correct. But poor is not about the money in your bank account. Poor is not about the suit you are wearing or the dumpster you are standing beside. Poor is a state of the soul. Poor is when you have no self-respect left. Poor is when you allow other people to define your worth, to tell you who you are, to erase you. I was truly poor that night, not because I was hungry, but because I had accepted their definition of me. I had given up. My brother Edward, my cold, ruthless, estranged brother, he knew. He didn't give me $39 million. He gave me something far more valuable. He gave me a 60-day quarantine. He gave me a legal, ironclad, binding excuse to force me to reclaim my own soul. I look out over the city. I am not a poor man. I am not a failed man. I am not an incompetent old man. I am Daniel Pierce, and for the first time in my entire life, at 70 years old, I have finally learned to love myself first. The greatest lesson I learned at 70 years old was not about money or revenge. It was about value. I learned that true poverty isn't being homeless. It's being poor in spirit, allowing others to define your worth. We teach people how to treat us. Blind forgiveness without accountability isn't a virtue. It's a form of self-destruction. My brother's final gift wasn't his millions. It was the reminder that you must respect yourself first. You must be willing to fight for your own dignity, because if you don't, no one else will. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping the peace with family and standing up for your own self-respect?